Welcome, brave souls, to another episode of our scary stories. I'm your host, inviting you to dim the lights, put on your headphones, and venture with us into the obscure corners of reality. Tonight, we bring you an unnerving tale where ancient myths come to life, and the fog outside your window might just hold something far darker than mist. So take a deep breath and steel yourselves, for we are about to unravel the eerie tale of eyes in the mist. Laura's heels crunched on the gravel driveway, announcing her arrival at her new sanctuary. The old Victorian house stood before her, an embodiment of faded elegance and years etched into wooden sidings and weather-streaked windows. It was both charming and nostalgic, like a melody from a song you'd forgotten you ever knew. She clutched her purse in one hand, the keys to her new life jingling softly in the other. A wistful smile found her lips. Here, away from the city's relentless cacophony and her disintegrated marriage, she hoped for serenity, for renewal. She took a deep breath. The air was heavy with the damp earthiness one only found in rural seclusion, tinged with the distant scent of pine. There was also a subtler note, an undertone she couldn't quite identify, something ancient and arcane. After unlocking the front door and stepping inside, she glanced around. Wallpaper curled at the edges, and the hardwood floors creaked in agreement with every step she took. Each room was a testament to decades gone by, and as she roamed through her new dwelling, the atmosphere whispered stories of its own, some familial, some joyous, and some that seemed to murmur cautionary tales. It was then that she first sensed them, the small irregularities. A picture frame tilted just so, not as she remembered placing it. A low thud from the upstairs room even though nothing had fallen. And then there was that draft that seemed to snake its way in from some unseen crevice, chilling her neck momentarily. She shook her head. Old houses have their quirks, she reassured herself. The sun dipped below the horizon as Laura unpacked the last of her boxes. She decided it was time for some herbal tea and self-reflection, but just as the kettle began to wail, she felt it. A subtle shift in the atmosphere. Looking out her kitchen window, she noticed that the landscape had been draped in mist, a thick veil that blurred the boundaries between her property and the untamed woods beyond. It lent the world a dreamlike quality, but also seemed to deepen the encroaching night. Taking her tea to the living room window, she peered into the misty gloom. That's when she saw them, two orbs of iridescent light, suspended in the mist like will-o'-the-wisps. Her heart froze in her chest. Unblinking, they stared back at her. For a heartbeat, everything in her screamed that these were not mere reflections of earthly lights. They bore an otherworldly hue, something she'd never seen yet felt she had always known. A chill crawled up her spine, filling her with both dread and fascination. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they vanished, swallowed by the mist. "Dear," she stammered, setting her cup down with hands that trembled ever so slightly. "They have to be deer or maybe some nocturnal creatures." Her voice wavered, unconvincing even to her ears. She knew that animals didn't look at you quite like that, with an awareness, a silent demand. Yet, she rationalized away her fear. Rural life was new to her, after all. These were just the jitters, the price of letting her imagination run wild in an unfamiliar setting. She drew the curtains with a forced finality and headed up to her bedroom. But as she lay in the dark, wrapped in the cold sheets, one thought burrowed into her mind, refusing to let her surrender to sleep. Those eyes were not just seeing her, they were looking into her. And somewhere deep within her, where logic held no sway, she knew they would return. For whatever had cast those orbs of light into the mist seemed to say, "You're not alone, Laura, and what we want, only you can provide." Alone in the night, she turned and adjusted her pillow, but the comfort it offered was illusory. Despite her best efforts, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just intersected with a tale as old as the mist-shrouded land outside. A tale that was far from over. Laura's car rumbled along the winding country road that led to the nearby town. Fields of golden wheat and clusters of dense forest sped past her windows. She had made a list, groceries, cleaning supplies, maybe some local produce, but her mind kept drifting back to the ethereal eyes in the mist. Could the rural locals shed some light on the strangeness enveloping her new home? As she pulled into a parking spot near the main square, she noticed the quaint quality of the town. Aged stone buildings with ivy creeping up their sides, old-fashioned lampposts that promised a warm glow come nightfall, and narrow cobblestone streets that had seen generations pass over them. People greeted each other warmly, and their conversations filled the air with a sense of close-knit community. After picking up some essentials from a small grocery store, Laura ventured into the local cafe. A bell jingled above the door as she entered, drawing the eyes of the patrons. She sensed the subtle shift in atmosphere as conversations briefly paused, a natural wariness toward an unfamiliar face. However, a warm smile from the barista quickly set her at ease. With a cappuccino in hand, she found a corner seat by a window and tried to catch snippets of conversations around her. It wasn't long before she heard it, whispers of odd happenings in the surrounding countryside. Two older gentlemen in flannel shirts, sipping black coffee, were discussing something that immediately piqued her interest. "You remember old tales about the thing, don't you?" one of them said, his voice tinged with a blend of amusement and reverence. "Ah, the hounds of the dark, you mean. Ghostly things, protectors of the other world," replied the other. "Childhood stories to keep us from straying too far into the woods." The conversation shifted to an ongoing archaeological dig. Rumor has it they found some strange things there, Celtic artifacts, some kind of ritual stones. Who knows what they've stirred up? As Laura absorbed the words, a thrill of both excitement and trepidation ran through her. Could there be a connection between the dig and what she had experienced? On her way out of town, she found herself involuntarily taking a detour past the excavation site. Fenced off and marked with signs that warned of ongoing research, the site was a pit of churned earth surrounded by equipment. She felt an invisible thread pulling her closer to the ancient secrets hidden below. Resolute to dig deeper, she headed to the local library. The scent of old books and polished wood filled her nostrils as she delved into the folklore section. Hours slipped away as she turned the brittle pages of tomes describing Celtic myths. She read about the Fae, mysterious and capricious beings of immense power, otherworldly hounds said to haunt the land, and other entities both wondrous and terrifying. As she closed the last book, Laura felt the weight of the knowledge she had acquired. Entities from Celtic folklore were closely tied to the land itself, and the text suggested they could be vengeful if disturbed. She pondered the implications. Had the excavation stirred something best left untouched? Laura checked out a few books and made her way back home. The day had given her more questions than answers, but one thing had become clear. She was entangled in a web far more complex than she'd ever imagined, a tapestry of ancient myth woven tightly into the very fabric of the here and now. As she approached her house, she noticed the mist beginning to roll in from the surrounding woods, as if to confirm her newfound understanding. Only this time, she felt a subtle, hair-raising awareness that she wasn't just coming home. She was entering a realm where past and present, myth and reality, were indistinguishably intertwined. And as the mist thickened, she braced herself for whatever, or whoever, would emerge from its veiled depths. The twilight had a different texture this evening, a sort of luminous gray that seemed to hang in the air longer than usual. Laura sat by her living room window, her eyes fixed on the woods beyond her property. She held one of the books she'd borrowed, its pages filled with tales that no longer seemed so fantastical. The sun finally relinquished its hold on the sky, and as if on cue, the mist started to ascend from the earth, ghostly fingers unfurling to claim the landscape. Her pulse quickened. Inwardly, she felt a mingling of dread and an inexplicable sense of expectancy. This time, the eyes were not shy. No longer distant orbs floating at the edge of her vision. They were closer, brazen, and decidedly more numerous. 2 pairs, then 3, then 5, materializing from the mist like a council of watchers. They glowed brighter than before, casting eerie reflections on the window pane. As she stared back, frozen between disbelief and fascination, she began to hear them, the whispers. Faint but articulate, the words were elusive, forming phrases she couldn't quite catch. Ethereal voices, carried on the tendrils of mist, looped around her consciousness as if searching for a way in. She shook her head to dispel the illusion, but the voices lingered. Remembering her research, she sprang into action. With a sense of urgency fueling her, she fetched salt and chalk from her kitchen. Following symbols she'd copied from her books, she began to sketch protections on her doors and windows, circles and intricate knots designed to ward off malevolent entities. She traced a salt circle at the threshold of her front door, the grains crunching softly under her trembling fingers. Just as she stepped back to inspect her work, a knock resounded, making her jump. Through the frosted glass of her front door, she could see a silhouette, small and hunched, unmistakably human. Her breath caught as she realized her salt circle was now broken. With mixed feelings of caution and relief, she opened the door. An elderly woman stood before her, draped in layers of shawls and clutching a wooden cane. Her eyes, clouded with age but sharp with wisdom, met Laura's. "I thought I'd come by to welcome you, dear," she said. Her voice carried an accent that Laura couldn't place, heavy with the texture of a life long lived. "Thank you, that's very kind," Laura stammered, unnerved by the timing of this visit. "Newcomers often underestimate this land," the old woman continued. "You may think you stand on simple soil, but you're really standing on layers, each a different chapter of a very long story." Laura wanted to ask her to elaborate, to spill forth every secret she held, but the words seemed lodged in her throat. "Be careful what you summon with your markings and symbols," the old woman warned, glancing pointedly at the salt and chalk. "Some doors are best left unopened." With a nod that seemed to carry a weight of unspoken understanding, the woman turned and left, her form soon swallowed by the encroaching mist. Laura closed the door, her thoughts racing. Her new protective symbols seemed suddenly frivolous, childlike drawings in the face of ancient, cryptic forces. She thought of the eyes, the whispers, and the ominous words of the elder. She was on a precipice, teetering between her modern life and an ancestral past that refused to be forgotten. As she ascended the stairs to her bedroom, the mist seemed to press against her windows like a sentient being, its formless shape tinged with anticipation. For better or worse, Laura sensed she had captured its interest, and the mist, along with the entities it concealed, would not be so easily dissuaded. That night, as she lay in bed, her room dark except for the glow of the moon through the mist, she couldn't shake the feeling that her actions had set something in motion. In piercing the veil between worlds, she had issued an invitation, and something had heard her call. Laura's sleep had been restless, haunted by dreams woven from the threads of mist and whispers. She awoke early, compelled by a sense of purpose she couldn't ignore. Clad in jeans and a worn-in sweatshirt, she made her way towards the excavation site she'd heard about in town. A light drizzle permeated the morning air as she reached the fenced-off area. Her eyes scanned for any security, but the rain seemed to have granted her a temporary respite from prying eyes. With her heart pounding, she climbed over the fence, her boots sinking into the mud as she landed. The site was a chaotic spread of tents, tables littered with artifacts, and deep pits revealing hidden layers of the earth. It was in one of these pits that she saw them, markings etched into stones, arcane symbols that mirrored the ones she'd read about. Strewn among the ordinary remnants of pottery and bone were relics that sent shivers down her spine. Small statues resembling the figures of Celtic mythology, their visages twisted into grotesque expressions. She approached a table covered with documents, maps, journals, and what appeared to be ancient records. One paper caught her eye. It spoke of a curse, a binding spell meant to seal away mythical beings from an era long past. It alluded to a talisman, the key to this metaphysical lock. A cold realization washed over her. The excavation had likely ruptured this age-old seal. Just then, the drizzle escalated into a downpour, as if the heavens themselves were lamenting her discovery. Laura stuffed the crucial documents into her bag and hastily made her way back, her thoughts racing faster than her footsteps. Upon her return home, she felt it instantly, an electric charge in the air, a thickening of the atmosphere. Her front door stood ajar. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, her every sense heightened. The living room seemed untouched, but as she moved further into the house, a sudden chill gripped her. That's when they materialized. No longer just eyes in the mist, the creatures now bore semi-physical forms. Translucent yet undeniable, they hovered in her dining room like wraiths, the air around them pulsing with an otherworldly energy. "We know you've been to the excavation site," one of them spoke, its voice a discordant blend of multiple tones. "What do you want?" Laura mustered the courage to ask. "The talisman," another creature hissed, its form shimmering as it spoke. "Only you can activate it, descendant of the lineage who sealed us." Her mind raced back to family stories, tales of distant ancestors endowed with mystical knowledge. Could she be the key to an ages-old lock simply by virtue of her heritage? "The talisman has been broken into pieces," a third creature added. "We need you to make it whole again." "Why would I help you?" Laura's voice quivered, her bravado failing her. "Because, dear Laura," the first creature said, its form tightening as if in emphasis, "we can give you something no one else can, knowledge, power, the untapped potential that courses through your veins. Make the talisman whole, and its power is yours to wield as well." Torn between fear and an insatiable curiosity, Laura pondered their words. The mist outside seemed to congeal into heavier clouds, pressing against the windows with a yearning that mirrored her own. Had her lineage destined her for this? Was this curse, or perhaps a twisted form of blessing, her legacy to bear? As she stood there, the weight of generations pressing upon her, she knew she was at a juncture that could not be undone. She could defy these ethereal beings and risk their wrath, or she could embark on a journey to unearth secrets buried not just in the ground but within her very DNA. Either way, the veil between her world and the misty realm had been lifted, revealing a path fraught with peril and promise. There was no turning back. Laura spent the night sifting through dusty family albums, old journals, and keepsakes that once belonged to people she'd never meet. In the attic, amidst the smell of aged wood and mothballs, she found it. A tarnished, old trunk secured by a rusty padlock that seemed almost as ancient as the myths she'd been entangled with. A pair of bolt cutters dealt with the lock, and the trunk creaked open to reveal a collection of peculiar objects, vials of dried herbs, handwritten scrolls, and finally, the talisman. It was a pendant, a perfect circle with intricate symbols carved into its surface, made of a metal that defied identification. It felt unnaturally cool to the touch, yet holding it made Laura feel like she was tapping into a reservoir of latent power. In the trunk, there was also a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed but its words clear. With trepidation, she leafed through it and found the ritual, an ancient rite capable of using the talisman to either banish the entities or bind their power for her own use. No sooner had she read the lines than a soft murmur filled the room. The creatures were back, this time taking on shapes designed to pull on her heartstrings. Her mother, who had passed away when Laura was a child, materialized before her, her form almost solid, her voice a lilting song of sadness and love. "Choose empowerment, my love, and we can be reunited," the figure said, touching Laura's cheek with a wisp of a hand. It was an emotional artillery shell, and Laura felt her resolve shake. Other figures began to manifest, long-lost friends, old pets, each more persuasive than the last, urging her to seize the power offered. Just then, the room's temperature dropped further, and the figures dissipated like fog under a gust of wind. Standing at the doorway was the elder from the village, her eyes a mix of wisdom and sorrow. "You're at a dangerous crossroads, child," she said, walking in as though she'd lived there for years. "I am Morwen, a guardian of the ancient traditions. I've been watching you, waiting for the time to offer guidance." Morwen explained that the talisman was indeed powerful, but the creatures would be bound to Laura's will, a seductive proposition, but one that came at the price of eternal vigilance. You could banish them, sending them back to the realm they came from, sealing the veil once again. Or you could draw from their power, gain knowledge and abilities beyond mortal comprehension. But remember, power corrupts. It's a relentless force that can turn even the purest soul. Laura felt like she was teetering on a precipice, one foot dangling over a chasm of endless possibilities, both exhilarating and terrifying. The whispers of her mother's voice still echoed in her ears, battling for space with Morwen's sage warnings. "You don't have much time," Morwen finally said, pointing towards the window where the mist was beginning to accumulate again, clinging to the glass like a living thing eager to invade. "Choose wisely, for your choice will ripple across realms." In her hand, the talisman seemed to pulse, as if it were a heart itself, alive and hungry for a decision. Laura knew the entities were waiting, their incorporeal forms gathering strength for the final act. And so, standing in the attic amidst fragments of her past and the key to her future, Laura realized that the most difficult trials are those that force us to confront who we truly are. With Morwen's watchful gaze upon her, Laura took a deep breath and began to recite the incantation, committing to a path that would forever alter the fabric of her destiny. The attic felt like a crucible, a chamber where fates were sealed and destinies decided. Laura's eyes, red-rimmed but resolute, glanced once more at Morwen, who nodded approvingly, as if silently saying, "You're making the right choice." With a tremor in her fingers, Laura grasped the talisman tightly and stepped into the chalk circle she'd etched onto the wooden floor. Words in an ancient tongue flowed from her lips, resonating with the kind of authority she had never felt before. Each syllable tingled in the air, etching lines of light around the circle as the talisman glowed brighter with every verse. Outside, the mist contorted as if in agony, curling around itself while the glowing eyes within it flickered, unable to maintain their haunting gaze. As she recited the final words, Laura felt an immense surge of energy course through her. For a fleeting moment, she sensed the vast reservoir of power the entities held, a cosmic library of knowledge and capability, all just a whisper away. It was tantalizing but also unnerving, like standing on the edge of a towering cliff, fascinated yet horrified by what lurked below. With a shout, she thrust the talisman into the air. The symbols carved into its surface blazed like miniature suns, sending a torrent of light cascading through the attic, tearing through the mist outside. An otherworldly howl echoed as the entities were pulled into a vortex, their forms disintegrating into ethereal threads before vanishing completely. It was done. Laura slumped to her knees, overwhelmed by a cocktail of exhaustion and relief. Morwen approached, her steps deliberate and respectful. "You chose well, Laura. Our world is a little safer because of you." As if in response to Morwen's words, the mist outside began to lift, pulling back like a curtain to reveal a world colored anew. Greens looked greener, the sky a shade bluer. Even the air smelled fresher, tinged with the scent of moist earth and new beginnings. In the weeks that followed, Laura found herself woven into the fabric of the community. People spoke about her in reverential tones, a mixture of awe and gratitude in their voices. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was now marked in some indelible way, set apart by experiences most could never understand. Laura stood on her porch one chilly morning, a cup of tea warming her hands. The mist had returned, but this time it was just mist, its mundane beauty a sharp contrast to the terrors it had once concealed. As she turned to go inside, her eyes caught a distant sight, an almost imperceptible glimmer within a far-off fog bank. New eyes. She frowned, not in fear, but in a newfound awareness that her story was perhaps just one of many yet to be told. Somewhere in the corners of the world, other veils remained thin, other misty portals hovered, waiting for the curious or the unwary. But those are tales for another time, thought Laura, closing the door behind her, yet ever watchful, ever vigilant. Ah, dear listeners, you've survived another chilling journey with us on our scary stories. The mist may have lifted for Laura, but who's to say what lurks in the foggy patches of your own world? Remember, the veils between realms are thin and ever shifting. Always keep an eye on the mist. You never know what might be keeping an eye on you. Until next time, sleep tight and keep your talismans close. This is our Scary Stories signing off for tonight.